Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today for another episode of Astropraxis, where we explore social and collective themes through the lens of Hellenistic astrology. So, I am Rhiannon, and I'm joined by my talented co-hosts, Tawa, Brett, and Natasha. And we are here today to talk about the end of Uranus and Taurus. So, Uranus has been in Taurus for the last 7 years, and we want to look at what this has, where this has impacted our charts, and just take a look at through the lens of Taurus and like Taurus and Venus as its ruler. Um, so we will look at some key dates here and some aspects and explore through that. And I want to just, for all the journalists out there, folks who journal their astro transits, I just want to share. And can everyone see my screen?
Yep, awesome.
Okay. So Uranus went into Taurus back in May of 2018, and it did have a brief retrograde period going back into Aries November 6th of 2018. So it was in Aries for just a little bit longer and then moved into Taurus um, March 6th of 2019. So you could use this time frame to kind of think about what was happening, what was building at that time. And Uranus actually went into, has been in Taurus uh, until last night, late last night or early this morning, depending on what your time zone is. It initially ingressed into Gemini actually last July for a brief period, and then came back into Taurus on November 7th of 2025, and then finally yesterday, today, has ingressed into Gemini. So we are now in that time period. And I can put this in the comment sections too, if anybody's interested in these dates, just to like do some journaling and look at their own areas where this may have impacted their life. So we want to look at, we want to take a look at Uranus has been in Taurus. And so we want to take a look at the significations of Uranus in Taurus and through the lens of Venus. So Venus is the ruler of Taurus. Taurus is a fixed earthy sign that likes its comfort, its creature of comfort. And when we look at Venus being in that sign for the last 7 years, we want to think of the themes that it targeted or hit as siblings. We can think of mothers, even our own aesthetics and things that we value, like how we bring our value to the table as well. And so Uranus revolutionizing that area over the last 7 years is what we want to take a look at today. So the other thing that I thought was really interesting is that Venus, the ruler of Taurus, has been going through and kind of escorting Uranus into Taurus into Gemini and landed there at its 29th anaretic degree before it moved into Gemini. So Venus kind of is making this sweet little handoff, if you will, as like a final hurrah to the Uranus and Taurus experience that we've all had. So before I hand it off to Tawa to talk about Uranus, does anyone have anything else they want to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's and we may talk about this at some point, but it's this is such a unique combination because of the steadiness and the fixity of Taurus, where Uranus is like almost the complete opposite in some senses. So I'm sure like once we get into some of our what's it called? our personal testimonies, if you want to call it, that it may speak to that. But I think that is interesting, just that archetypal combination.
Yeah. Thanks, Brett.
Right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Uranus specifically, and Rhiannon already mentioned that Uranus is a bit of a revolutionary energy, and it's kind of shaking things up and trying to move it around a little bit, which is interesting because it's a bit of a not necessarily a conflict of interest, but a different way of approaching things from the Taurian, the Taurus way of doing things, which is, as she said, very fixed, in its extreme degree, a bit stubborn maybe, of in that fixity. And then Uranus is just demanding shifts and change, and if something's not working, that you try something different. So I just kind of outlined Uranus from some positive attributes that are really commonly attributed to Uranus, and then some of the negative ones, or the more challenging. I mean, we don't really want to say positive or negative because we see, I mean, we are such binary thinkers and stuff, and really a lot of times what can be called positive is actually difficult and challenging, and what it's called negative can have really impactful benefits. So Uranus is known to be the revolutionary. It's known for seeking freedom and liberation. It's known to be innovative and insightful and brilliant. It can be that innovation and insightfulness can be both in a technological sense as well as a like celestial sense. Uranus is very futuristic, so it's looking towards, the potentials of the future. And then in some of the maybe more challenging aspects of Uranus is that it can be very disruptive because, if you're looking for freedom and liberation and innovation, you've got to kind of break up some of the norms and the things that are currently in existence. So it can be disruptive, it can be restless, it can be kind of unstable and unpredictable. It can also be a little bit too excessive of a need for autonomy, which that particular trait jumped out a lot to me because I feel like this particular 7-year stay of Uranus and Taurus has really kind of shown my tendency towards having an excessive need for autonomy. And so I could really relate to that. But anyway, it can be shocking and unpredictable and just oppositional and defiant and a typical kind of rebel and rabble rouser. Although I would never personally put like rebel without a cause sort of connotation on Uranus because it's always really with a cause. There's always something that Uranus is vying for or hoping for or wishing into the future for all of us. And so that's part of what Uranus has been doing for each of us in our lives in that part of our house, or that part of our chart. So, of course, Taurus is going to be, we look in Hellenistic astrology, we look at the houses in whole sign houses. And so Taurus is going to be the sign that is or whatever house it is for you. For me, it happens to be 11th house. And as we each talk about kind of our personal experiences with it, it became really apparent to me to be able to look at some of the 11th house themes as Taurus was moving through, as Uranus was moving through Taurus during this time period. So that was really fun to do. And we'll get into that more, but I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Brett, who's going to talk a little bit about aspects for us.
Yeah, thanks, Saul. So, excuse me. So aspects are very important, to say the least. So aspects are the relationship between planets and their respective sign and house. So planets, here's the idea, it's that planets emit light, and so that is how they're able to have relationships or communicate with each other. So a planet on its own, mean something, but when they have interactions with each other, it brings more archetypal depth and meaning to whatever is going on in the chart, right? And so let me pull this up real quick. And this is a quick graphic I got from whowander.com. Just showing the aspects, the five Ptolemaic aspects. So you have your conjunction, which you can't really see right here. But it's when a planet is within 3 degrees of each other, if we're talking about degree base. Um, then you have your sextile, so then that's when they are, hold on real quick. That is when they are either 3 signs apart or separated by 60 degrees, and they are of the same gender. Then you have your squares, is when the planets are 4 signs apart or separated by 90 degrees, and they are of the same modality. Then you have your trine, which is looked at as like the most harmonious aspect. So they are 5 signs apart, separated by 120 degrees, and they are of the same element. So um, I think the harmonious part of, and we'll talk more about this when we do our aspects episode, but what makes it so harmonious is that they're of the same element and the same gender, right? So you have two things going for it. And then your opposition is what it sounds like is an opposition. They're directly opposite of each other, 7 signs apart or separated by 180 degrees. And something that was that's resonated with me because I have uh sun moon opposition in my chart personally is that there is an inherent tension between oppositions. It feels like almost at all times, right? And so I remember Adam or Adam Ellenboss or somebody else spoke about how um, you have to balance the tension between the two. Like you can't become reliant on just one side. And I thought that was really cool. And I am very excited once we get more into that at one point. But yeah, aspects are really important. That's how the planets interact with each other, where they can create harmonious or sometimes challenging relationships with each other. And I'm about to take this deal off right now. It's like I'm using Zoom for the first time. I'm just kidding. All right. Yeah.
All right. So does anybody have a burning desire to be the first to share about the personal stuff, which will help kind of delineate some of the basic things we've thrown out there in the ethers on the video? I'm happy to go ahead and start with just some basic stuff as opposed to the aspects, because it was interesting as I was doing my preparation for this and just looking more carefully at dates and what was happening in my life. And so as Rhiannon said and showed us the dates, May of 2018 is when Uranus moved into Taurus. And then November of 2018, it retrograded back into Aries and stayed for a bit, and then found its way back to Taurus in March of 2019. And what I really noticed for me during that time period was that I had moved to a new community at the very end of 2016, and kind of had needed and took some time to slowly get involved in that community, and definitely started moving into the community more in 2017, but by 2018 I was really like building a lot of networks and groups and alliances and like really reaching out to the community, which was for me was really interesting because, as I said before, Taurus is in my 11th house, which is the house of networks, alliances, groups, friend groups, partners, working groups, future dreams and aspirations, all of that stuff. And as I looked back at it, I was just like, I was even looking in my calendar, and I had started teaching the yoga philosophy part of a yoga teacher training program. And so I was doing those small groups of people. I had started a red tent group, and it was really just a group that I decided to start, that I wanted to, because I wanted to meet the community and meet my people. And so it was a women's group that we did for about a year. And then I also was uh, teaching yoga classes at a local yoga studio. So I was in community in that way. And then on top of that, like for the future goals and aspirations, and I really was, I had been writing a book, and I had been writing it for since 2015 at some point, and it was just very piecemeal, and I was just kind of writing poetry and writing essays and didn't really know that they all belonged to one piece. But by 2018, I was really like deeply into filling in the blanks and kind of bringing it into one coherent piece of work. And so it's just that, it's just very obvious that there was all this stuff that was very heavily influenced by Uranus moving into my 11th house and just kind of activating the energy in that house. And then on the other end of that, like as we're coming to the end of that, I have moved out of all of those things.
Mm.
Like absolutely none of them are still a part of my life. Like I'm not even seeing clients anymore in the last year and a half or 2 years. I'm not teaching yoga anymore. I'm not teaching yoga teacher training anymore. I'm not offering my own workshops anymore, which I was all of that stuff that I was doing during that time period. So it's really interesting that it was just like this huge energy in innovation and just activity happening in that part of my life at that time that is all moving in a completely different direction now. So
That's fascinating, Tala. And all that stuff that started was new, right? And it's funny when you think about within that cycle, the 7 years, the new things came in and the new things left. And it's just like a season of new, but a season of new that you don't hold on to, right? Like we as a society hold on to everything, and this was one of those things that it was like it was new, and you always expect that what you start with will always be there, right? I don't think we ever think this thing is going to be gone. It's going to leave me. And that natural progression was like, it's like it was a, as soon as you said it, I was like, reason or a season. What do they say is when people come to your life, it's for a reason or a season. I think this is kind of like both. There's a reason and a season. And, you know, with attachment, I learned about attachment in with Taurus, and I think about how you have to learn to attach to and learn to detach from. Um, yeah, I think it's interesting. You had the new thing started and the new thing ended within that time.
yeah, I thought it was really interesting too, to,
Mhm.
it's like you got to see that the full, 7-year cycle, it, it really cycled and fully, and it actually made me super curious about what this new season
Mm.
is going to be, you know what I mean? Like, because I have been even maybe you could say in waiting, like noticing that things are shifting and one stage of my life is coming to an end and another is opening, but I don't really know what the opening is. And, you know, at some point I will, just as at some point I did for the last one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
definitely saw that too. Like, I mean, not just in my own experience, but in like listening to other people, like even just listening to Adam talk when he said, Adam Ellenboss talk when he said, he started off as a monk and then ended up like leaving that whole tradition.
fascinating.
Yeah. And thinking back, I'm just thinking there's things that I started at that time that I thought might be a part of my life for forever and realized weren't really part of my value system. And that shifted and like you really like had to get into it and like, you know, really immerse yourself into it. Maybe that's that fixed element of Taurus that says like stay here for a minute and like see what's here and like, like see what can really grow out of this.
Mm.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's great, Rhiannon. I like the idea of accepting and saying, see what's going to grow here, right?
Yeah.
Don't be in
Hmm.
such a rush to move forward, but see how it's going to grow. And That's perfect for Taurus, right?
All right.
It's the growth in nature.
Exactly.
Oh. Um, yeah, so I mean, I'll go next if nobody minds. I personally think I think everybody should write their own little memoir of their Uranus and Taurus cycle from the last 7 years at this in this era that we're in. And I know that obviously, um, this is for, every era, like everybody's going to have this kind of experience but I just think in this time period that we're in from 2018 to 2026, and we look at how much the world has shifted and where Uranus is affecting you and going through your chart in this particular time of our society is really fascinating. And I think it is one of those things that Uranus, I think of the speed with Uranus and it being like spasmodic and whatever, but also having to stay like it's groundbreaking. And you think about the Taurus, that earth sign, Uranus is a groundbreaking sign and it awakens you to, well, it's going to break ground. That's how it's going to wake you up, which groundbreaking is not fun. I mean, it's great. We all want it. I won't go into a lot of detail about my Uranus and Taurus story, but I've sat down and I used some tracking 5 themes provided by Adam Ellenboss last year to talk about the Uranus and Taurus story. And I highly recommend if anybody really wants to sit and contemplate their story. I think this is really great to do this through these 5 things to watch for because they are bringing in the Turian and the Venusian uh, significations. Things like making things simpler because, Taurus wants to keep it simple and stable and grounded. So learning how to adapt our lives, a change and knowing what we desire and um, what we think we desire, and especially about how we look, especially that Venusian quality. And so for myself, I went through quite a few changes. Uranus and Taurus is in my ninth house, and I do see that all of the things that changed over the time has a link to my spiritual thinking. I can see how it has linked to all of it. And for me, it had to do with getting more in touch with nature, starting gardening. I gained a dog. I had a dog, and then she passed, and in that time, and then so many things changes to materiality, to your materials and your possessions. I had major changes with that. But I actually kind of wanted to mention something that I think is interesting, which is just the opposition of Uranus and Taurus to the natal position of Uranus and Scorpio, which is the generation, looking at a generation. And so this is my generation. And that's for those people that were born between 1975 and 1981. And I was thinking to myself, we talk about the Uranus opposition. This is the halfway point of like 80, 84 years. And if you think about the halfway point, um, you're in your late 30s to your early 40s. And by this point, if you think about any person there was an established set of rules that they had to follow in order to be a functioning member of society. And I personally think for those, and I know you can apply this to the Gen Xers, you can apply this to the, younger millennials, but this little pocket in between the Gen Ys, the Zennials, whatever you want to call them. I personally think from my perspective, I think, we grew up with a foot in each pond, pre-internet, post-internet. We were in our 20s as we were going through the growth of like Napster. I'm going to totally date myself when I say that Napster, LimeWire, um, and the start of Facebook, when you're in your 20s as opposed to your teens or you're a little bit older, you're using Facebook at that time. That was a big thing. But one of the things I think about is that as a generation, I know from people in my generation is we had the guidebook that was handed down from the other generations, this is how you have to proceed in life in order to be a productive member of society. So you have to do the 40-hour work week. You have to work on settling down, which I think is a really interesting topic. Somebody said a statement, settle down. Oh, when you settle down. And I'm not really sure now what that means. And that's definitely a Uranus thing in Taurus for me is it's changed my mindset. And I do think that people of this generation, if you think about it, those of us going through this time in our civilization, we followed that code book. And by the time we hit our 40s, the world really shifted and changed on all of the rules that we thought were rules that we needed to adopt about relationships, about our physical appearance in our bodies. Um, in the last 7 years, we've seen the words patriarchy more than we've ever seen it. In the last 7 years, it's funny, and this is related to Scorpio as well, as we've heard about perimenopause, which has existed as long as women have been around. And yet, in the last about perimenopause, way more than we've ever had. Um, and another one that I'll throw in there because I had to Google this very quickly, and I was just like on a hunch, and I said, which age group is most active in the polyamory community? Because I had a hunch, and there is something about there's a range. They include the Gen Zs, and the millennials. But there is most of the websites I looked at, they do kind of focus in on this age group of, late 30s, definitely between 40 and 45. And so I think that's really fascinating because we grew up on the rules about relationship and marriage and partnership and financial partnership and the rules about relationship in terms of our own sexuality and our reproductive systems, all those things. And then it felt like a grenade was thrown in over the last few years. And everything that we knew, we kind of heard was wrong, even about like nutrition and things like that. And so I actually think seeing that our age group being the most participating in polyamory, I think that, once you get to that, they don't talk about the Uranus opposition nearly enough. We talk about the Saturn return. Um, but the Uranus opposition is the midlife crisis. So we have followed the rules up until our 40s to check off this list of what we're supposed to be doing to be to be an acceptable member of society. And then you hit your late 30s and your early 40s, and that Uranus comes in to wake you up and say, yeah, those weren't your rules. Those are somebody else's rules that was made for you, like a patriarchal system, a family system, whatever it is. And so I think that a lot of people kind of said, excuse my language, they're like, fuck it, maybe pun intended. And you see a lot more open relationships and restructuring of what a relationship looks like, an intimate relationship looks like. We've also seen lots of changes with that as well. But um, you see companionship and you also see where emotional needs are different from physical and sexual needs. And so there is a lot more play that happened. And I think that this generation kind of said, I mean, I'll say this for myself is that I finally got to one day and it was around 2020 where I said, what the fuck was I believing? Who told me any of this stuff that I believe that I've been following? And then I realized, no, it's a crock of shit. And so it shakes you up. It really does shake you up. And so I think it's really interesting that, oh, actually, I wrote this down. I have a big circle around it because I've heard this from a few people who said lies. They told us lies.
Yeah.
I've heard this about having children. We also know that there's a lot more people not having children. I think it's more in the younger age group because I think a lot of Gen wise, if you're my age, I mean, I would be considered now, oh my gosh, you're not married, you don't have kids. What happened? For shame. And a lot of us now clutch your pearls. Oh my gosh, like a lot of pearl clutching, right? But now we are at that point where I think a lot of us are like, yeah, fuck it. We were told to pack a lies and we're going to kind of do things our own way and we're going to explore. And with Scorpio being that sign of transformation, I think we see that quite a bit. I'm sure a lot of people going through this at this time in their late 30s and their early 40s when they got the kid, the job, the kids, the jobs, the house, the dogs, the cats, the hobbies, and then they start to look at them and say, did I really want that? Did I really want that?
Mhm.
So kind of went a little bit off on that, but I just think it's as an opposition to the natal Uranus in Scorpio of transformation of hormones of your deepest needs and also sitting in I think a lot of people in the Uranus and Scorpio generation have a little they're quite tongue in cheek. There's always a little bit of something in the background that's lingering. They can be lovely, lovely, sweet people, but there's something kind of interesting and quirky. I'll use that about this group as well. So yeah.
I love that description, Natasha, because it made me think of, because you use the term settling down, like when are you going to finally get to the stage where you're settling down? But you hit that Uranus opposition and you've worked to like settle down and you get to it and you realize that settling down is not actually something you would want. It's just settling, right? It's funny that we have both those words, right? Because we're
Hmm.
encouraged to settle down, but really when you settle down, it's just you settling for some playbook that somebody else sold you that doesn't fit and isn't really yours and doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
very, very interesting.
Love that you brought up the whole perimenopause thing as well, because that's so Uranus and Taurus, like in the sign of Venus, like that's just very like, okay, women and their health are being
Hmm.
revolutionized. Like we're actually paying attention to that and creating creating like treatment plans for women so that they can like get through it and they don't have to suffer through it in silence. So
That's
I think
right.
that's a really good point that you brought up about the recent tour of Taurus, Uranus and Taurus. So yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
I
Thanks.
have, I have a brother who's my younger brother is in that generation. And a lot of what you were talking about is just really totally fits him and I think his experience of you know
Mm.
what it was like to kind of buy this load of bullshit and then get to a place and being like what because it's also a generation that's really quite capable, I guess, is the word that comes up the most. It's a
Hmm.
generation of very capable people. And so so when you are a highly capable person and you hit this system where you're like, wait a minute, I've been doing everything right in the way I'm supposed to, and it doesn't fucking work, and so when you're
Yeah.
a really capable person, that is highly impactful, I think, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Um,
I think that was it. I think what's special about it is that if we took other generations that went through their Uranus opposition at different stages of our history, what were they going through when they hit their 40s, when they hit their midlife crisis? What did the world look like for them, right? And we look at so Uranus and Scorpio was 19, like I said, 1975 to 81. And so looking at what the world was looking like at that time and comparing it to where we are now in opposition to that. Um, you think about what was being built at that time, maybe almost those rules that were really we had to sink into, and now we're like looking at the rules across the street, and you're like, wait a minute, I don't know. And Uranus is there to wake us up to say, um, yeah, these things that were established for you, like even things like university degrees, like we're talking about values and education has a value. We were all taught to, you finish your schooling, you must go to university or college. For shame if you don't. And right, and that was the ticket for life, that you
yeah.
will be set with this piece of paper, a degree. Again, a whole lot of bullshit. And so we all came out with these degrees in hand. And I don't know how many people I know that look at that degree and say, what do I fucking do with this now? Because it didn't prepare us. And so our values about, I would think too, our values about like education and how we make our money, right? Is really interesting. I also throw this in really quickly, just as I saw a post from a well-known Instagrammer, TikToker person. I forget what her name is, but people would know her. She does a lot of like dancing to like 90s music, and she compares it to the millennials and the Gen Alphas. And she was laughing because she said back in the day we used to take Shazam and we'd be in the mall and we'd be like looking Shazamming for the song, right? So true. We know that, right? Looking for the song. And now instead, people of our age, so true, because I did this morning, are using the Merlin app to listen for birds. We're like, what is that bird? So I also have to wonder if, like me, if other people in this generation bracket are really like, ooh, nature is my like they are waking up to the idea of nature being my connection. I can have animals as my children, and and I think then we kind of influence the younger millennials and the Gen Zs, in that thinking. So yeah, sorry, I just trailed off there.
No, that was good. That was good.
Yeah, no, appreciate y'all. I just want to briefly share kind of like my Uranus and Taurus story. So like Natasha, Uranus is in my ninth house, was going through my ninth house. So yeah, pretty drastic time for me over X amount of years, but changes and almost a rebellious attitude towards like my spiritual and religious foundation, which was monumental for me. And around this time is when I got into astrology. This is when I started to really commit in a lot of ways to my beliefs. And as Uranus can bring changes, I think there's a lot of challenges that come with that as well, especially something as strong as ninth house topics are. Um, you know, the like I was talking about earlier, like your spiritual foundation, what religion, your belief system. Um, a lot of the times those are the things that are really personal to who you are. And so it really gave me a strong insight to the reflective capabilities of Uranus, and how sometimes it will be like what the hell just happened. That's Uranus a lot of the times, right? And it's also interesting too, is just like because Uranus moves so slow, it's over a long period of time, right? So that's why it's going to be interesting once Uranus goes into uh Gemini, um, especially me personally in my 10th house. I know you too, Natasha, of like it's going in a place where it's going to be a lot louder than most, just because the 10th house is an angular house. 10th house has to do a lot with like um uh you know what is seen in the public, sometimes your vocation, your occupation, things like that. But yeah, Uranus in Taurus has certainly been interesting, and I am very thankful for it.
Yeah, that's
All,
interesting too. I think that's the thing, is that you become thankful for it, but it's tough, right? It
yeah,
is
there
one
were
of those.
some difficult times for sure. Yeah, but
Mm.
all worth it, right? And it's all
Yeah.
like kind of like how you look at it too, you know?
Yeah. When it's happening, I mean, for me, it happened in my third house
Yeah.
of like, siblings, and my moon is there too. So I just, like, I feel like I definitely was like, what in the hell is happening right now? Like things shifted with relationships with my siblings, like that I did not expect. That actually like ended up like even at the end of it where my moon is, like reconnected with me with my mom, which was really wild. So that was like a big thing for me. But yeah, it's definitely it definitely shifts the foundation of like whatever house it sits in. It shifts that whole thing has changed now. I feel like I know I feel like it's for the better. I mean, I don't know if that's just and I have a lot of tents. I have a lot of squares to that house, or right, 2 squares
Mm.
to that house. So
Mm.
even with that, I still feel like it was for the better, and like I feel better coming out of it, like reflecting on it. But definitely very challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think there, the groundbreaking, that awakening aspect is, um, it's definitely, I guess that's the thing too about Uranus is that you do feel like blindsided by it. And sometimes that's okay because I think if you're in preparation, for it, and that's tough in Taurus because Taurus wants that stability and it wants to be um grounded and um assured and secure. And but as Uranus is going to awaken us, it's going to it does it in a way that doesn't allow us for preparation, right? It's more about what am I thinking about? Oh, what's the term? What do you do when something happens afterwards and you have to try to fix it? I'm
Like
getting the wrong term.
hindsight is 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hindsight is 2020,
Yeah.
or like the fixer.
Yeah.
Like you can only do something after it happens,
Yeah.
Yeah,
right? And
in
that's
retrospect,
Retrospect. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
um in retrospect, right? And you start to kind of you are forced to adjust, right? And I think this is those lessons too, is that with Uranus, it's like, well, if you didn't force to adjust, then Uranus was going to keep blindsiding you. It would keep doing that just to get you to adjust. So yeah.
It's
Did anybody?
it's well, I just wanted to make one last comment because after
Hmm.
hearing everybody's stories, like the connective mechanism that came up for me was that Uranus really shows us how cyclical and circular
Mm.
things are. Like there's really
Yeah.
that, life is not linear. And
Mm.
so, because all of the things that have come up for all of us, even though they're completely diverse, it's like a spiral and you're just coming to another place of that same journey and it's not, so I think that's interesting to see that this super like revolutionary shock the system sort of energy that can be associated with Uranus is really revolutionary just in its sense of reminding us that things are not the way that they appear. They're not the way our logical mind or just our Western thinking mind tells us that it should be, that things are linear and there's a start and a finish and but Uranus is like, no, that's not true at all. You
Yeah.
know, that it's a
And
cycle.
and then it forces it's funny because like within that cycle then, and like you said, Tawa, it's not linear, it is a cycle. We are not used to letting go of anything, unless there's like specifics. Like we let go the end of the year when there is a new year. We all consciously we are accepting of that. But I know from myself, and maybe because I have Chiron and Taurus, so maybe that's part of it is, but I just remember thinking about attachment. And so whenever you start a cycle, there's something new that comes into your framework, whatever that might be. And yeah, I think we can attach really easily to it and hope that it lasts forever. And then Uranus, as it awakens you to something new, it awakens you again when it leaves, like when it finishes the cycle, because then you're kind of like thinking to yourself, wait, I thought this will be, I don't know if anybody else feels like this, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um, like I think 80s song Forever Young. And like I remember, I actually, when I had my dog Ripley, everybody would just used to look at her when I was walking her and just adore the fact that she was so tiny. And they said, and I was like, no, she's like 4 or 5 years old. And they're like, oh, she'll be your forever puppy. And that was interesting. And I've had struggled with the idea of that word forever since
Mm.
since losing her. And And it's interesting what that can mean. And so I think that Uranus going through kind of teaches you to um, attach, like I said before, is learn how to bring something new and accept it. And then once you love it, you're like, well, now you got to let it go. And that's a like Uranus is going to make you do that in some way or shape or form. So I think it's really interesting that it does that
Well, it's
and
like,
points to evolution.
yeah, and it also just made me think, in our culture, we're so obsessed with closure. I mean, how many times have each of us said to ourselves, if I just had closure on this, but Uranus is maybe saying closure is an illusion, it's an illusion. It's closure doesn't really exist. It's just the
Yeah.
cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that's great. Does anybody have any other anecdotes for their time of
Yeah,
Uranus and Taurus?
yeah. I was just hoping that when Uranus was going through my ninth, I was gonna like have gain some like esoteric superpower, and I've been pretty disappointed
Oh,
throughout this time. No, I'm just kidding. No, but I was thinking about this when you were talking, but just like I think it's interesting just how something as how like chaotic like Uranus can be, that it still shows that there's like a divine plan.
Mm.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's Uranus is like very
Mm,
grounding in that sense. And like I was saying earlier, just like when Uranus was going through my ninth, I'm like what the hell is happening? What the hell is happening? And now like reflecting on it, and even reflecting on it during it, I was like, okay, like um these things are like working out in ways too, as wild as it
mm,
may seem. And I think that's really cool how um different planets have their way of expressing like um this is how things are supposed to be, even when they don't seem like they are.
hmm.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that tower card. Like I know Uranus is associated with the tower card in the tarot, and I just think about like that breaking down to rebuild. To that reminds me of that. Brett, like you
Hmm.
said.
I
Hmm.
need to look into that.
Hmm.
Hmm.
You said tarot
Yeah. And
card?
Yeah, it's in tarot. The Uranus is associated with the tower card. Hmm.
Okay.
When
We
you
might need to
talked
Falling
we
from
might
the
about
need to
tower.
do oh real quick, I was gonna say we might need to do a
Yeah.
tarot episode at one point too. That'd
Oh
be
yeah.
cool.
yeah.
I would love
Y-
that.
Y'all can put me on.
Yeah.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say I don't know anything about tarot. I mean, I've just like heard about it here and there, but it just doesn't happen to be one of the forms of divination that I've explored very much. But it sounds fun.
Yeah.
And it made me think of you were hoping for some sort of esoteric superpower with this transit, and it made me think that probably you have it, and it's that you can
Mhm.
see through the illusion of
Okay.
that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
No,
Like,
yeah, this is like the awakening period
right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
for
Right.
sure.
I
Yeah.
agree. I agree, Tara. I
Yeah.
was like, oh no, it's just lying quietly dormant, but Uranus and Gemini now, the door's open. The wind
If
is coming.
if this episode gets flagged, we now know why. YouTube's gonna eradicate
Vibration.
this episode at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Fun.
on that note, does anybody have any other like
Yeah.
anecdotes? No. Okay, so
Mhm.
then, since Uranus has officially moved and Venus has also moved, and as Rhiannon had eloquently put it earlier on, is that what was really nice about seeing this ingress is Venus, you know, handing off, escorting Uranus over to Mercury. And this is where we are today. While we're going to get deeper into it in another episode, when we talk about what it's like with Uranus and Gemini, I think for everybody it would be important to reflect on the fact that we are moving from a very dense, earthy um, earth sign to an air sign. And so what's going to happen is just if you're feeling a little bit lighter, a little less connected to the ground, this is something to make sure that you are taking the time to slow yourself down. The influx of information is going to keep coming, and to try your best to sit quietly and bring yourself back into your center uh, as we move through this time of what Mercury is going to do is being amplified by, or Uranus being in the sign of Mercury is going to amplify each other with the frequency, the vibration, the noise, the electrical stimulation in our bodies and outside our bodies. And so I think of just electrical frequency in the air, I'm sure some people are going to feel those days when you walk across the carpet and you get a little shock and a little zap to your system. And it's those kinds of things, but we're going to feel it even if we don't have those experiences inside our body. There's going to be a lot of electrical charge. And so I would say that as we are here with it today, you know, if you're feeling that excitement and that overthinking and, palpitations, stop for a few minutes and bring yourself back into your body, into this grounded place. And that would be super helpful for you.
Yeah, that's great, Tosh, because I mean, I feel like with Uranus and Taurus, we had a little bit more, I mean, grounded for what it's worth,
Mhm.
grounded experience of that. This is a whole new world. Like I feel like it's a new element. It's from earth to air. So yeah, I definitely, and I felt it last summer when in July when we went into it. I could from July to like even just November, like I was like, whoa. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, that was real. So looking forward
Yeah.
to more of that.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
Yay.
yeah.
All right.
Right. Well, is there anything else that anyone has before we sign off?
No, it's all
Okay.
good.
Sounds
Well,
great.
thanks everyone. Thanks for coming today. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time.